Good morning, all. Today we are going to discuss about constructor and destructor in C++. So today we are going to discuss about introduction to constructor, characteristics of constructor, and different types of constructor, and then we are going to discuss about the destructor. So constructor is a special function, member function of a class, which is used to initialize the members of the class at the time of creation of an object itself. So the constructor is very important when you would like to initialize more number of objects at the time of creation of objects itself. So this initialization done automatically by the computer at the time of creation of object itself. So the constructor will have the same name as your class name. So you can see here an example. We have a class add. It has a public data members int m comma n and the constructor add. So what the add is going to do, the constructor will initialize the data member m is equal to 0 and n is equal to 0 at the time of creation of object itself. So there is no need to write any statements to invoke the constructor. It will automatically invoked by the compiler while you are going to create a constructor. So there are a lot of characteristics of the constructor. We must declare the constructor as a public and it will be created or invoked automatically, and the constructor do not return any values to the invoked program, and the constructor can't be inherited, and the constructor can't be a virtual function. So we cannot refer their addresses. We cannot, with the help of the pointer, we cannot get the address of a constructor. They may implicit calls through the operators new and delete function when through the virtual functions. So constructor function is responsible for creation of object, and if no constructor is defined implicitly by the programmer, and this will be created automatically by the compiler at the time of compilation of the program. So this is what called as a default constructor. So here we are going to discuss an example for a constructor. I have two classes. One class is sample, which has a data member, private data member, some data member, and we have another function, some function, which is used to initialize the some data member. And I have another class sample, which has some data member, and I have a constructor. So void sample. So this void sample indicates the sample is a constructor which is used to initialize the data member at the time of creation of objects. So there are different types of constructors or exist. First one is the default constructor or the non-argument constructor. Second one is the parameterized constructor. Third one is the copy constructor, and the fourth one is the dynamic constructor. So the default constructor is a constructor without any parameter is known as the non-argument constructor or simply called as a default constructor. So if no constructor is defined in a class, the compiler will implicitly provide an empty body constructor which is called as a default constructor. We have no need to write a code for the default constructor. At the time of compilation of the program itself, the constructor body will be embedded by the compiler. So this is what a non-argument constructor. So I have a class circle which has a data member radius, and I have a constructor circle. Why do I have it call it as a constructor? The constructor will have the same name as the class name, and I do not pass any parameter to the constructor. Here I am going to initialize the value of the radius is equal to 0. Let us discuss another example for how default constructor is being recorded by the compiler. So I have a program with a class circle which has a data member radius, and I do not have any constructor. While I am going to compile this program, the compiler will automatically add the constructor which has an empty body. The second type of constructor is the parameterized constructor. Sometimes we become necessary to initialize the values of data with the help of the values user have. This is being achieved by passing parameters to the constructor as like we are passing actual parameters to the functions with the help of the parameter constructor. So in this example, I have a class circle and I do have two constructors over here. One is the default constructor and which do not accept any values, where I do initialize the value of radius equal to 0. And I do have another constructor circle float of r. So I'm going to pass the parameter or as a actual parameter to the constructor. This will be assigned to the value for the radius. So here I am going to overload the constructor. This is what constructor overloading. So there are two constructors which has the same name, but we have varying number of arguments are called as the constructor overloading. So this is what and another example for parameterized constructor. There are two ways of calling the constructors. Either we can call at the time of creating an object, we can call this parameterized constructor like this: circle object of 7.6. This statement indicates I am going to create an object for the class circle. I do pass a value 7.6. While I am going to invoke this constructor, what will happen? This parameter will be passed to the constructor and this will be assigned to the radius. The radius value will be 7.6. So either this will be called explicitly or it will be called implicitly. So this is what an explicit conversion. First I am going to create an object and then I am going to invoke the constructor. So we have a multiple constructor in the class. As I told you that this is what called as a constructor overloading. So here I do have add class. This add class have two constructors. One is without any arguments I do have a constructor, and I have another constructor which is going to receive two arguments. The constructor is called depending upon the number and type of the parameter. And this is what an example for multiple constructor in a class. So I have a class add. This class add contains a single non-parameterized constructor. So here I am going to initialize the value of m is equal to 0 and value of n is equal to 0. And I do have another constructor add which will accept two parameters, int a comma int b. So value of a will be assigned to m and the value of b will be assigned to b. And I do have another constructor which accepts an address of another object as a parameter. So that object values member will be assigned to the values for m and n respectively. Here I have another example for multiple constructor in a class. Have a class complex which has two data members x comma y, and I have a complex which is unparameterized constructor, non-parameterized constructor, and I do have another constructor which accepts only one parameter, and I do have another constructor which accepts two parameters. So how the compiler is going to invoke the function? So depends on the number and type of arguments that we are going to supply, which will distinguish what constructor to be called during the runtime. So a C++ compiler has an implicit constructor which creates an object even though it's not defined in the class. So we know what is by implicit constructor, what is default constructor. Either we are creating a constructor or not. While we are going to compile the program, it will automatically create a constructor. That is what called as default constructor. It will be called implicitly. Now we are going to explain about how default arguments are being used in the constructors. So I have two constructors. So when I have two constructors, meaning that the constructor is being overloaded. So the first statement says that I do not pass any arguments. So this is what a default constructor. In the second statement, I do pass an argument which is being initialized as 0. This indicates in case I am going to pass a value to the constructor, that value will be accepted by the constructor. In case I do not pass any value to the constructor, then it will assign the default value 0 to the data members. Here I do have an example for the default constructor. I have a class power. So the power class have a default argument constructor. So what is there? I have three private members, int num and int power and int answer. Now what I'm doing here, I have a constructor power which accepts two arguments, int n comma int p. So I do initialize the value of n is equal to 9 and the value of n is equal to 3. And I do have another function, that is what show on the number function show, that is used to just display the values of the number, power and so on. Now I have what I'm doing here. So I have a class power of p1 comma p2 of 5. So what is that p1? When I'm going to create an object with the help of the first method, what will happen? It will call the default constructor. So you can ask one question. We not have the default constructor in our program. Then what will happen? So the default constructor will be added by the compiler at the time of creation of or at the time of compilation of program itself. So the default constructor will initialize nothing. So just we are going to create the values of create an object for p1. Next I do have create another object p2 of 5. So what will happen p2 of 5? So what we wrote in our program, we have created a constructor which will accept two parameters. So int n is equal to 9 and n is equal to 3. So what will happen? But we are passing only one parameter. Then what will happen? The value 5 will be assigned to the first parameter. N is equal to 5. And for the value of p, it will take the default value. The default value we were initialized with the 3. So the second argument 3 will be assigned to num. So in case you are not passing any arguments, then it will have the value of n is equal to 9 and p is equal to 3. Now let us discuss about the copy constructor. The copy constructor is used to declare and initialize an object from already existing object. So here I have an integer is a class. So integer ampersand I. So which is used to assign an already existing integer class to another newly creating integer object. And another thing is integer I2 of I1. So what is happening? Integer I2. So newly creating I2 object will be assigned with the value of existing object I1. This is what called as copy initialization. So in the statement I2 is equal to I1 will not invoke with the copy constructor. If I1 and I2 are the object, the statement is legal and assign the value of I1 to I2 member by member. A reference variable has used to an argument to the copy constructor. One cannot pass the argument by the value to the copy constructor. We can always pass the value as a reference to the copy constructor. We can see in this example, I have a class num. It has a public data member n and a constructor. This is what a default constructor, and this is what a constructor with an argument, and I do have another constructor which is a copy constructor. I do send an address of already existing object by using the symbol ampersand, and I do have another member function show which is used to display the results. So in the main method, first what I am doing in num j of 50. So this is a constructor, parameterized constructor. While I am invoking this statement, and this parameterized constructor will be called, which assigns the value of n with the value of 50. Next, I do have another value, num k of j. So I'm going to create an object k, and I'm going to pass the value of j. What is j? J is an already existing object. So what I would like to do is, I would like to assign the value of already existing object to the newly creating object k. So what constructor will be called? num of ampersand k. Now what will happen? N is equal to j of. So j of j dot n. Already j what value is equal to 50. That value will be assigned to n in the newly creating object. Now let us see about num is equal to j. Num L is equal to j. What will happen? I do create a new object L which will have the address of an object j. Now I do create another object num of m. So this object will be created without any constructor. So this will call the default constructor. That's it. Now let us see about the destructor. Destructor is again a special function which is used to remove an object from the memory. Actually removing in the sense it's not actually going to remove an object. At the time of destructing an object from the memory, if you would like to do certain housekeeping activities, then that operations we can place in the destructor. So destructor, how do we differentiate with the destructor from the constructor is by prefixing the symbol tilde. So I am having the class integer. So the integer class is having a member function which prefixed with the tilde symbol indicates this is a destructor. So destructor never takes any arguments or does not return any value. It will be invoked implicitly by the compiler upon the exit from the program or the block of function. That case may be clean up the storage that is no longer accessible. This is an example for a destructor. I do have a class A which has a constructor, default constructor A, which will display the value C of constructor is called, and I do have a destructor A. So how I am going to differentiate the constructor and destructor, which will be prefixed with the tilde symbol. So the constructor and the destructor will have the same name as the class name. Now let us see about how it is being invoked. So from the main function, I do create an object for the class A and int x is equal to 1 and int f is equal to 1, I do call the object constructor is being called. So when I'm going to complete the program, automatically the destructor will be called. So summary in C++, constructor is automatically called when an object is being created. It is a special member function of the class. The constructor has argument is called as a parameterized constructor. It has the same name as the class. It must be public in member. It won't return any value. The default constructors are called when the constructor are not being defined by the class. The constructor has parameter is called parameterized constructor, and the parameterized constructor help in viewing the values of an object that is being created. Thank you.